Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give people a few more seconds to join in. But welcome to our webinar, Extreme Makeover Intranet Edition. While we're waiting for people to log in, we're going to do our usual icebreaker question. We have a great icebreaker question today that's a great segue into today's content. So I'm going to ask you guys to put in the chat, what food will you be barbecuing this spring and summer? Steak and vegetables right off the start. Veggie burgers, pineapple, artichokes. This always happens. You ask a food question and people get so excited.
Everyone loves food.
Carrots. Ooh. Aw, someone doesn't have a barbecue.
We'll have to invite you over. Safely, of course. Smash burgers, yeah.
Smash burgers? What's the smash burger?
It's like you make a little patty or like make a little meatball and then you kind of crush it so it increases the surface area and then kind of get that all ground into there and oh, it's delicious.
Ooh, chicken tacos.
Chicken taco, juicy brats.
Juicy
yeah.
brats.
Boy, everyone actually has a plan already. I'm very surprised.
I know. I was going to say, within seconds, everyone knew what they were going to do.
It's like the fire hose is on.
Okay, so like I said, this is going to segue into the presentation. So back to our presentation. For those of you who don't know who we are at ThoughtFarmer, we're internet software that helps organizations improve internal communication, collaboration, and knowledge share. And it's probably no surprise to learn that as an internet vendor, we of course use our own product. We've had an intranet for several years, but just like our customers, we were prone to some bad habits. But unlike most of our customers, we were spoiled to have someone to lead our internet redesign. But no fear, he is here to share some wisdom and hopefully some easy takeaways so you can begin your very own internet redesign. So our special guest today is Wil Arndt. He is the creative director at ThoughtFarmer. With over 25 years of design experience, Wil's work has been honored with over 250 industry and design awards and numerous accolades in the media. He is the former instructor at Emily Carr and BFS and has worked with clients such as CBC, Discovery Channel, Government of BC, Honeywell, Lululemon, Pokemon, and the University of British Columbia. But most importantly, or at least most importantly today, he was the mastermind of our entire intranet design. So over to you, Wil.
Wow, thanks, Kelly. That's very flattering, very amazing. Mastermind is probably a bit of a strong word, but I'll take it because I am a creative director, and I just take credit for other people's work. That's my job essentially. So, but no, you're too kind. I think. Actually, this is exciting for me because I've spoken at Thought Summit before, which is our bi-yearly intranet conference, but this is my first ThoughtFarmer webinar, so this is pretty cool. So yeah, it's my pleasure to be here and share the story of our intranet redesign project. So some of you sent us a bunch of questions beforehand. A lot of these are going to be addressed in the webinar, and those that aren't, we'll aim to respond to you either individually or at the end. And of course, feel free to ask questions as we go. We'll gather them up and get to as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end. So in this webinar, I'll show you how to turn your old intranet from this, which is actually probably worth around 3 million in Vancouver, into this, which is likely worth a bit more. So in this session, we're going to talk about how to engage with multiple stakeholders. This is something lots of organizations, big and small, have to deal with. Revising your intranet's information architecture, optimizing your intranet homepage or other landing pages, both intranet or otherwise. taking the pulse of your staff and just sort of distilling your organization's employee experience into some actionable attributes. And then some layout tips you can use in your communication and web projects. So from the quick breeze through, I could see we've got people from all over the place. Some few from Europe, actually. Thanks, or if you're listening to the recording, thanks for doing that. Some folks from the East Coast are probably just digging into their lunch now and trying to juggle some email while keeping an eye on this webinar. We'll try to keep you entertained for a bit. Some folks on the West Coast, and then a broad mix of like comms people, web developers, designers, and so it's definitely a broad mix. And I'll try to keep it accessible to everyone. Some of it might feel a bit light. I'm not going to go into depth about a ton of like really technical things, but hopefully there's going to be something here for everyone that you can take away. So Kelly and I are both fortunate to live in British Columbia. And it's May here in British Columbia, one of my most favorite times of the year. Kelly, do you have a favorite thing you like to do? Are you happy about May for any reason? Is there anything you like to do in May?
Only baseball. Baseball's in full swing, no pun intended. And that is my favorite part about the spring and May.
Nice, nice. Well, can you guess maybe what my favorite might be?
It's food related.
Well, it is food related. How'd you guess? Yeah, 3 words. BC spot prawns. They're sustainable, healthy, and delicious. And so trigger warning, everyone, there will be images of spot prawns in this webinar. And some of you might be asking, what do spot prawns have to do with intranets? And I assure you the connection is tenuous, but I will try to make it work because I've always wanted to get spot prawns into a presentation somewhere. So here is a recipe for spot prawns. It's spot prawn season. I want to look up some good new recipes. I mean, I have my favorites, but there's always room to grow. So let's take a look at the anatomy of this recipe page. You've got your header, you got your title, right? Delicious photo of the meal that you're about to create. Then the author gets into a little bit about, what BC spot prawns are. What are they for the uninitiated? Why would people get so excited about them? Then there's an advertisement, got to pay the bills, right? And then there's a little section on why the author loves BC spot prawns. And of course, a photo of a live BC spot prawn in case you're, want to know what to look for when you go to the fish market. The author talks a little bit about why BC spot prawns are sustainable. Another advertisement. Now he's thinking about ways to eat spot prawns. Another advertisement. Now thinking or talking about the ways that people in British Columbia eat BC spot prawns. And then finally down here, we have the actual recipe. So if we kind of take a look at this from a diagrammatic perspective, we've got about 80-90% of fluff. And then, the last little bit of meat down there, which brings me to this webinar. I'm hoping to make this less 90-10, 80-20, and more of this, because, we're going to have to cover a little bit of fluff because there's always some important context and theory to consider. But I'm really hoping that most of this is going to be meat. But actually, now that we've spent all this time talking about BC spot prawns, I'm going to have to make that fluff even shorter. Actually, let's just skip that altogether. So building the business case. Often getting started with your internet redesign project is the hardest part, right? How do you get that project off the ground? And when you do bring up the notion internally, inevitably, you're going to get the question, why a redesign now? Sometimes it's obvious, right? But also sometimes good enough is good enough, right? So I think, let me get into a little bit of the background about our own intranet and the context of our company, just to kind of give you a sense of where we were coming from. So some background, our intranet, for reasons I'm not going to get into here, it is called Sparky. It was built at the time when we were looking at this, redesigning it. It was built almost 15 years ago, 2005. And then, as you imagine, over the decade or so, things started to get a little loose, right? Content sprawl, unused sections, too many cooks, not enough dishwashers, right? We didn't have enough people to kind of clean up the loose ends and messes there. And then in 2019, ThoughtFarmer was split off from the parent company, which was called Open Road and is now OXD. So, we had been one company. 2019, it was a business decision to split the two. And both companies have evolved since that original intranet and are continuing to evolve, but we still share an intranet because we just like each other so much. But we also share resources. We share an administrative staff, HR, that kind of thing. So it still makes sense for us to share an intranet. But as you imagine, we have different customers, different clients, and that can lead to some security concerns. And so that's something that we had to address as well. And so in some ways, while this might be a bit of a unique situation, right? Two companies sharing the same intranet, it's actually not that uncommon for like different brands to live under the same intranet, right? Especially if you're in a retail or consumer goods space with different product lines. And the things I'm going to talk about here are things that many companies experience, whether it's one company or 20. I think there's something here that's going to be useful for everyone. But I just wanted to make sure you had a bit of an understanding of the impetus and like what were some of the factors driving our decisions here. So something that I think point out, it's obvious, but it's important to realize that every company's business case is going to be different. And that's why you need to get strategic about it in your particular case, right? So find out what those key barriers are within your company and focus there. And you're not going to find cookie cutter surveys or techniques. It's going to be specific to your organization, but I will share what we did, and I think there's going to be things that you can learn. So this is our intranet circa 2019, Sparky. For us, everyone more or less agreed that what we had wasn't working and that it was time for a change. But everyone has their own idea of what that means, right? And why it's not working. And then, but how much of a change, right? Some people were like, let's just toss the whole thing out, design and everything and start from scratch. Others thought this would be a very bad idea. And then, leadership had concerns, right? With 15 years, that's a long history. Was there staff attachment to the Sparky name, to the little, we've got a little like robot up there in the corner. Was there sort of this attachment that we didn't want to risk losing and alienating staff? And then, other questions are like, well, if not this design, then what design? Which opens up like a whole Pandora's box of everyone's opinions and thoughts and ideas, which are all valid, but it's going to, it's hard to kind of gain consensus through that. But this is, and that, the other concern was like design wise, we have two brands, right? So which brand do we use to reflect in our intranet? And then what would people feel like if their intranet didn't reflect the company they worked for? So those sorts of areas were where we focused our research efforts. So our research was a peer-reviewed employee research survey. It took 14 weeks to plan, 4 weeks to build, and 12 weeks to roll out. Nah, I'm just kidding. It took me about a day. I basically just slacked everyone informally and kept track of the responses, right? And I kind of don't want to mention this because any staff listening in on this might start to catch on that random messages from Wil might have an ulterior motive. But yeah, I just kind of reached out to people and said, hey, like it's come up that Sparky's not working, right? How do we make it work better? Really super informal message to 50 plus staff asking several questions. I logged the answers in a spreadsheet, summarized them, including some guiding comments. And I know this probably is not super scalable for really large organizations, but even in that case, I feel like you can target a subset, right? And you can point specific representative people across the organization that you can reach out to without having to do a lot of spending a lot of time on this. But the point is, find out your stakeholders' key concerns and make sure you tailor your efforts to get answers for those concerns. So this didn't take me weeks. Like I said, it took me about a day. And then we discovered that some of our concerns weren't really concerns after all. So to the question, how would you feel if we rethemed Sparky to use the ThoughtFarmer brand, right? So OSD people would come to an intranet with the ThoughtFarmer brand. 76% were like, okay, like that's, we have cute owls and animals and vibrant colors in the ThoughtFarmer brand. That sounded great to people. So that wasn't a huge concern. Another question was, what if we split Sparky to have two separate brands for two company sections, right? That's something we can do with ThoughtFarmer. It requires a bit of custom code and customization, but it's possible to like have an OXD section with OXD content that when you're in that section, it's themed to OXD, and then a ThoughtFarmer section, when you're in that section, it's themed for ThoughtFarmer. And 67% also seemed okay with that. And then we asked, what if Sparky were some sort of hybrid combo brand, right? What if we took elements of each, which I don't ever really recommend in a kind of in a public setting, but I think for internally facing initiatives, it's not a bad approach. And actually 80% seemed fine with that idea. And then ultimately, like, how do you feel about the name Sparky? And 72% were either neutral or actually didn't like it. So that gave us some pretty clear signals for us and the leadership that, maybe we didn't need to be so worried about it. So pro tip here, engage and consult as many people as feasible and possible. So this does several important things, right? So first of all, it plants the seed. It gives them a hint of what might be coming in kind of a safe, controlled space, right? People want to feel like they have control. This is, we're not redesigning the intranet. We're just thinking about redesigning the intranet. Even if the reaction is negative, after a few days or weeks, they'll sort of come around and start to think like, yeah, maybe actually it wouldn't be so bad to redesign that intranet. So it plants that seed. Secondly, it gives them ownership of something that will impact them on a daily basis, right? People don't like it when you change things they use all the time without consulting them, right? And it also makes them feel like they've contributed. They've helped build this thing because they have. And then, for you as the intranet manager or designer, it'll raise things that maybe you hadn't thought of. So for example, in our case, we often give contractors access to areas of Sparky, to areas of our intranet to access certain projects. So in that case, a combo OXD ThoughtFarmer identity kind of makes sense, because if you're an OXD contractor and you come to an intranet that's fully themed ThoughtFarmer, it might be a confusing and disorienting experience. So that was something that we hadn't thought of and actually helped us consider a direction forward. So I wanted to keep my promises. Here's a plate of spot prawns to help us stay on track and keep forward with what's really important about this presentation. So just put a pin on that. We are going to get back to spot prawns later on, and I'll loop it all back around. But let's talk about content right now. Designers might recognize an old quote that design is 95% typography. Meaning that the typographic tools you use define the feelings that are evoked in a design. I also like to say that interfaces are 90% content, right? Not 95, but 90. The success of your interface design is going to be critically impacted by the content it features. So for us, and I suspect for pretty much any other intranet redesign, kind of a cosmetic makeover is going to look good for a little bit, but unless you address the underlying and fundamental content issues, you're going to either get back to where you were, or you're not going to have the impact that you are hoping for. And content is not only on like the homepage itself, but that stuff up here too, right? Top level intranet categories. That's the tip of your content iceberg. And so, yeah, you can't embark on a successful redesign project, even if maybe you're just looking at the homepage, without looking at the content structure and the page layout. So after getting approval for the intranet redesign, the first step was a content audit, right? And after 15 years, you can imagine there was a lot of content, 110,000 plus pages live and archived. For a company of 50-ish or so people, that's kind of bonkers, right? That's a lot of pages. We love our intranet, obviously. And after 15 years of being a single company and then splitting that apart, and especially along client and customer lines, it turned out that it wasn't going to be as secure as it should be for SOC 2 compliance certification, which is something that ThoughtFarmer was going through at the time. So obviously this whole thing alone, content audit and content revising, could have been a year-long project by itself. So to keep things moving, we had to come up with a plan. So using ThoughtFarmer's sitemap report, we exported our intranet's current site structure. And you can kind of see that here on the right if you squint. I wouldn't worry too much about the details there. But yeah, so we went into an audit, but to make it manageable, we kept the audit to only 3 levels. You know, and with 110,000 pages, I mean, we had sections that were like, you know, 10, 11, 12 levels deep. I mean, it was crazy in some cases, right? So we just said, let's just stop it at 3. Anything below that, you know, we'll figure out what to do with that later. We also, as we're going through, tagged the company that the content belonged to. So it was either ThoughtFarmer or OXD, or in some cases there was blended content. And then we made sure to identify a section owner, right? Not someone that just had their name attached to it, but someone who actually, you know, will manage the content and like either on a day-to-day basis, or was just, you know, by nature of their position, needed to be keeping an eye on that. So, and so using that as a basis, we started working on a new information architecture, right? So here's, you know, one of the first questions on this exercise, right? Is like, how do you get people from different disciplines and departments to agree on a new information architecture, right? Everyone has their own notions of what's important and how to structure the information. So the pro tip I have for folks here is get everyone to agree on performance principles first. So performance principles, these are like a shared set of criteria that define how we'll approach the new information architecture and what the IA should look like, right? We all agree on these principles, and then we can agree that the decisions we make are based on something other than subjectivity, right? So I'll quickly just breeze through ours. These are ours, they're specific to us, and yours might be quite different. So we, you know, one of our principles was we acknowledge that 2 companies share this intranet, right? And that's significant because it kind of creates a set of like a type of respect for and empathy for the users of each company. It's like, you know, people from OXD may not find some ThoughtFarmer stuff that relevant, right? So just acknowledge that. Compartmentalize sensitive client information. So that was an important principle. Parse out mixed content. Like I mentioned blended content, right? Things that are either exclusively ThoughtFarmer or OXD were feasible, right? So we had pages, you know, that might have been specific to ThoughtFarmer's internal technology, but that had been, you know, over time mixed in with OXD IT guidelines, right? And because we had been one company, it made sense. But now with the split, you know, we had to identify where all those pages were that had to be, you know, had content that needed to be split out. Maintain groupings of content shared by both companies, right? So like administrative, HR, that kind of thing. Keep Sparky demo friendly, demonstrating a working intranet. So as you know, since we do sell intranets at ThoughtFarmer, we often use our own intranet as an example of, you know, what our software can do. And so it's important to keep that demo friendly, but also being aware of client concerns and privacy and security. So that was really important for us. Keep administrative, you know, sort of office facing and employee experience, staff facing content separate where possible. So, you know, HR and the admin team, they have their own sort of setup, they have their own working area that the rest of the company doesn't need to worry about. But then they also maintain like a large, you know, resource for HR and onboarding and that kind of thing that all employees access. So being more intentional about keeping that separate so that information wasn't confusing to people navigating it. Don't fix everything this time around. So in keeping with like keeping it 3 levels deep, you know, we just kind of threw like content into like content buckets, right? And just kind of kept them in the same general area and then let the content owners sort it out later. And then we all agree that almost anything we do is better than what we have now, which is very liberating. And I think it's something that if you can get people to agree on, change becomes a little less painful. So the IA went through several iterations, but you know, using these criteria, we were able to justify decisions and gain consensus fairly quickly. So this is our final IA, which you can't actually see, which is fine. But more important here, we've got some tips to consider. So be ruthless. Don't be afraid to delete our archive. You know, again, after 15 years, There was a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of kind of nostalgia factor. And if it just hurts to totally get rid of it, then archive it. It's fine. And you'll find after archiving it, you won't miss it. And then once you don't miss it, you can safely delete it. There's so much useless content in there that it's fine to be ruthless about it. Set a clear time frame for staff feedback. So yes, reach out, get perspectives, get voices, but don't keep it open-ended, right? Get that that timeline in place. Make it reasonable, right? Don't say, hey guys, in an hour we're going to relaunch the intranet. If you can, get back to us. Give them a few days, a week, a couple of weeks, or something, whatever makes sense for your organization. But then people, who really care, right, and where this matters, they're going to make the time to respond and to review and to give you their comments. And then people who don't make the time, well, they had an opportunity, and they trust you, right? They'll trust you to make the right call. But yeah, so set that clear time frame. And I mentioned this before, right? Assign sections to content owners for cleanup. Large intranets and small intranets, right? Even if there's a dedicated intranet manager, it's a lot of content to go through, a lot of kind of expert information that you need to know that you don't necessarily know, and it's hard to ask one person or a couple people to maintain that. So distribute the load and delegate where possible. And then prepare the staff for changes. So I'll get into this a little bit later, but over communicate. Let people know this is happening, this is coming, and let them feel safe about it. And then again, for us and for everyone, consider security as you review your information architecture. How does information flow? Who has access to what? Now is the time to address that. So concurrent to your content audit, you can also start to consider the visual style of your new intranet. And this can bring up an inherent tension between external comms and internal comms, right? What if your internal culture doesn't always align with your external brand? And that might sound like, well, why wouldn't it? But I can see reasons why it wouldn't, right? Like if I don't know, like if you run hospice care homes, right? That's a very serious and hard subject, and definitely on the public side, you want to maintain a certain type of brand and a certain type of attitude and attributes. But internally, as a staff, you want to keep staff engaged, and you want people to enjoy their work and to find meaning and bring themselves into their work. And so that internal culture might be a bit more informal, right? And that's okay. There's a disconnect, but they're still unified in what they're trying to do. And so, who we are on the outside the same as who we are on the inside? Some brands, I would say yes, and some are not, and that's fine. So how do you create an intranet that both reinforces your brand, but also acknowledges the reality of your internal culture? So if you already have an intranet, sometimes to the untrained eye, if you're not a designer, it can be often difficult to determine if that visual style is actually aligned to your company's external brand. For that, I've got this kind of handy intranet brand alignment evaluation form that might help. But that's an entirely different session. But if this is of interest to you, feel free to reach out to me with questions, and I'd be happy to follow up individually. But yeah, in our case, we had two companies, two very distinct brands sharing the same intranet. And again, this might be a unique situation in one way, but it's not uncommon for different brands to live under the same intranet. If you have distinct product lines, that kind of thing. So we decided to create a hybrid internal brand that reflected elements of each. But more importantly, we wanted this hybrid internal brand to reflect the authentic employee experience of working at either company, right? Both companies should feel represented in this kind of hybrid brand. And so this was an opportunity to engage with our staff and to find out what makes their work experience special. Our guiding approach basically was this, right? We came to people and said, we're looking for insights and materials that will help us design an intranet that feels like an authentic, positive reflection of the shared employee experience here at OXD and ThoughtFarmer. So this time we did this through a longer survey. We emailed everybody on the staff, and I'll go through some of the questions here. So first question. Think about the experience of working here at OXD and ThoughtFarmer, particularly in terms of how it might be different from other places you've worked. So we wanted to get some, an aspect of what's the differentiation. Choose around 5 adjectives from this list that best characterize the positive aspects of your experience of our workplace, whether you're on-site or remote. And we literally blasted this huge list, very intentional list of attributes to our staff, and they answered. And it was pretty cool to see this come in and coming across both companies and how they felt their employee experience reflected in some of these words. So this is a great way to kind of quickly get to some common consensus across the company. The second question, thinking about the adjectives you chose in the previous exercise, are you happy with the current state of the employee experience, or would you want to see things change somehow? So now, I mean, this comes with a warning, right? Like, you've got to be prepared for some real talk from people, right? Especially if your survey is anonymized. But I do feel like this is an important step for you there. And so for us, it was kind of happy ending here. It was awesome that the vast majority of staff felt good about the words they chose. But it was also an opportunity to reach out to those 19% and find out how we might make things better, or where the disconnect was there, right? And absolutely have a plan to escalate concerns and feedback to leadership and others with the agency to act. Because if you don't do that, this is a great opportunity to find out what people are thinking and feeling, and so be ready to do that. Another type of question that we asked, which on the surface seems a bit silly, we call it the animals question. Which animal best represents the ThoughtFarmer staff experience? And so we gave staff a choice of animals or the option to write in their own animal. And in case you're wondering which animal we chose, the ThoughtFarmer staff identified with the rare golden otter, 32% golden retriever and 18% otter, while the OXD staff identified with the even rarer Elatriever, the 29% golden retriever, 14% elephant. We also asked staff to choose a TV show that best describes their employee experience, and asked them which sport or activity feels like the experience of working at OXD and ThoughtFarmer. So yeah, obviously it's not really about animal sports and television, right? What do we really learn about this? And what value do questions like this have, right? So without a visual vocabulary, it's often difficult for non-designers to explain and express their ideas about visual or experiential concepts. So, but if you can frame these concepts in terms of tangible artifacts, right, we can actually draw out more precise insights, right? So for example, here's a bunch of reasons why people chose the animal they did, right? And using their answers, we're able to extrapolate how they feel about the company, right? Small, fast, effective leaders, social creatures, human-centric, team player, Pacific Northwest, nice, calm, fun, playful, right? These are all really, really important. They're super valuable. They're a gold mine of feedback and insight. Family, team, smart, family, kind, smart, fun, cute, go against the flow, eager, right? So really, really great feedback. We got all kinds of, everyone had an answer for this. And now I'll often take this information further. I'll use relational database tools like Airtable or Notion to analyze the data. And these sorts of tools, they enable you to quickly and easily create like one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many relationships between keywords, themes, and concepts, and allow you to analyze that. I'm not going to get into the details of that right now, but doing this, and you don't have to do that. You can use like an Excel sheet or something like that. But doing this, we were able to come up with a set of adjectives that described the experience that both companies shared. So there were some experience attributes specific to ThoughtFarmer and some experience attributes specific to OXD, but there was actually a very strong unity in the middle, which was very cool to see. And so we could use that in developing our hybrid internal brand, right? So the words we happen to choose are collaborative, fun, and friendly. And as always, we made sure to communicate our findings with the company at key points. It was important to include a description for these adjectives too, so that people could agree on the meaning, but also we could confirm whether or not it feels right, right? If this actually feels right for them. These keywords, they also helped us define design challenges as we moved into the visual and layout mockup. So for example, for the collaborative keyword, the design challenge was, how do we demonstrate collaboration on our intranet without getting in the way of actually collaborating? For the fun attribute, the design challenge was, what intranet design elements might bring our sense of relaxed fun to life while maintaining a professional atmosphere? And then finally, for the friendly attribute, the design challenge was, how can we reflect the softer, friendlier face of our workplace in the design of our intranet and in the brand of our combined companies? So again, this is for us, but I think the key note here is, well, first of all, communicate that and use this as a way to test ideas before you go too far down a design path, but also really question what it means to implement some of these words, right? So meanwhile, can we talk about the actual intranet homepage yet? Yes, yes, we can. Before launching into what we wanted to change and how, though, we had to set a baseline and learn about the current homepage design from our staff. How well was the current homepage working? This is something that we wanted to find out. So in this case, we decided on another survey so that we could get the widest possible feedback, engage the most staff and in the most efficient way. There's definitely lots of other methods, observational testing, remote testing, but whatever you pick, I think the key to this approach is a user-centered perspective. And why are user-centered instead of organization-centric, right? Why user versus like talking to each department and what's important to each department and how they want to be represented? Well, an intranet's usefulness is determined by its users. So if the users don't use or feel their intranet is useful, they won't come there and it won't be successful. So you need to find out from the people that are using it, regardless of their kind of department affiliation, what's working for them, right? Now this here is it's a photo of spot prawns, just to remind us of our spot prawn recipe. So if you remember, the user goal here is pretty simple. Learn how to cook that spot prawn recipe, right? So why do they put it all the way down there? Generally, because they're trying to drag eyeballs down the page to increase exposure for their advertisers, right? And that's an organizational goal, right? And so if you're involved in internal comms, you, again, feel this tension. There are things that your staff want and need to do on your intranet, and there are things you need them to know. Right. So one technique might be to move the cheese, right? Forcing them to breeze past your content, hoping you'll catch their eye, have some news announcement or something as they try to find and get to their actual goal. But even as we can see with this like simple spot prawn recipe example, that's just a great way to aggravate your users, especially in a work setting where you don't want to create friction with their original goals. So listening to staff carefully and trying to create value is incredibly important. And I appreciate that this is a fine balance to get through. One question I just saw here pop up here, did we worry about survey fatigue? Yeah, that is survey fatigue is a real thing. In this particular case, because of the timeline, the surveys were spread out quite far. So the Slack survey wasn't a survey, right? It was me reaching out, so it was a more personal thing. But we did have two specific surveys here, and they were separated, I think, by probably about 3 months, right? So this wasn't like we didn't like do this in a week or something, right? We did the one part first and then the second part a little bit later. But yeah, survey fatigue is definitely a thing, and that might be a reason to mix up your methods too, right? Maybe some observational testing or user testing, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's talk about the results of our homepage survey. So this, again, is our homepage. We can abstract that down into this wireframe. Our homepage is made up of a bunch of cards. ThoughtFarmer has these cards, which are sort of like featured, like functional areas that you can kind of do things with. Just kind of walking through this with you real quick. We had some quick links, and these are things like you can see new employee info, monthly staff meetings, right? Things that people used consistently, or we thought they used consistently, things that would be important for them to find that might be buried down just right away on the homepage. Out of office calendar. So this is a calendar that people check to see who is or isn't in the office that day. It's also important, a lot of people use it for scheduling and trying to figure out, who can be included in things. The birthdays is great because, we're pretty social and we love to shout out people's birthdays, and everyone loves to pile on with greetings and welcomes and that kind of fun stuff. So we love our birthdays. And the OXD pet gallery, that's my dog picnic. We love to show off our pets, and that was a popular destination there. So the recent news feed. So this is a feed that's kind of blended. It's got some internal comm stuff. So you're going to have like corporate news in there, and then you're going to have some targeted things that only you see because of things that you're subscribed to, or things that you're following, right? So that would show up here. A poll, right? We like to engage staff with a bunch of questions. So this is a really fun way to just quickly ask staff what they think about something, and then it's always fun to see the results. We call it quote server. We have a store of quotes that people contribute. Usually it's misattributed quotes, out of context quotes from staff members, but also sometimes just quotes that people like from just, thought leaders and that kind of thing. Activity feed. So this is stuff that's happening that, this will be things like page updates, edits, things that people liked. In this case, we're looking at shout outs. So people that are, giving some shout outs to various staff people. And then customer screenshots. So ThoughtFarmer had a gallery of interesting or, really interesting ways that their customers were using internet homepages that they shared with us. And so we wanted to share that with the staff. And then the ThoughtFarmer Twitter feed, which, is pretty self-explanatory. So that was the old one. It seems cool, right? Like, why wouldn't that work? It seems like it should work fairly well. So our survey question, please rate how frequently you use the various components and features on the Sparky homepage. Really quick, some notes about the methodology. The weights of the answers were relative based on days in a work month. So if an employee answered they used a feature once a day or more, they got a score of 20, right? 20 days in a work month. Once a week, they got a score of 4 for 4 weeks in a month, and rarely got a nominal score of 1 and never got a 0. Yeah, we're running short on time, so I'm going to kind of not get into this too much. But basically what this gives us is, of the highest using users, so the users that use the homepage the most, here's how they use those features. So we were able to create a bit of this little heat map, which is pretty cool to see, of the high usage cards, right? So just based on the raw numbers, everybody uses the news feed. The vast majority uses the activity feed scan. Lots of people click on posts. Lots of people click on pages. 35% use the quick link, 60 out of office calendar, right? So on the surface, this seems indicative of what's important. However, I think you also need to look at the frequency, right? Because we asked monthly or, weekly, daily. So if we look at the highest numbers of answers for each question, which is highlighted in yellow here, we see that the majority of employees don't actually use many of the features at all. They're all in the rarely or never category, except 3, right? So these 3 areas of greatest overlap are most used most frequently by the broadest number of employees, right? So looking at it that way, from that perspective, the focus of importance sort of shifts away from the activity and news feeds and over towards the out of office calendar. Like, the out of office calendar is actually really, really important to people. So here's the areas used the least by the most that you can follow. And these are the areas that are at least used somewhat occasionally by most employees. And then putting it all together and overlaying the raw numbers, we have a more nuanced usage map. Second survey question, what is at least one thing you wish you could change about the Sparky homepage and why? And again, using our relational database tool, we did some more analysis of themes and groupings on what people would change about the homepage. we split that into several categories. So we've got a bunch of categories of feedback that we could then address. Here's some examples of what people said, right? I'd love to see content that changes more often. How often have we heard that on even just our homepage or public website? Being on the OXD side, the content on the TF side is less relevant. More vibrancy. Currently, the colors are grays and dull blues. It would be nice to have more fun colors. More attractive news, right? So if we look at it, yeah, it's kind of dull and gray. The news is repetitive, using the same kind of stock photo. It's not very interesting. There's not a lot of context to these titles, right? The spacing feels really tight. I find it visually very difficult to look at. Ouch. I rarely scroll down. I didn't even realize that some of these things were on the homepage. Wow. More real estate for recent news, as I usually have to scroll down because I can only see one when I first land there. I look at the out of office calendar more often, maybe move the calendar to a more prominent position, right? So here's that cheese, right? They're like, just put it at the top, right? The order on mobile, I'd like to see above the fold stuff. Above the fold stuff have more priority. Yeah, so the way ThoughtFarmer is built, columns stack in a particular way as the viewport width shrinks. And so we knew we could do better there and make that work in a more useful way on mobile devices. So the last question, I think, is there any feedback you'd like to share about the Sparky homepage that we didn't already cover? Always ask this type of question because you know, you're going to get insights that you didn't ask for and that you need to hear. So a couple of quick suggestions. You know, items in the quick links are not relevant to me. It'd be nice if I could set my own quick links. Digging into some data, when we saw a lot of comments around the quick links. And so we actually looked at Intranet statistics to tell us what the most popular quick links were. And you can sort of see, you know, the Sparky feedback section, which is a little forum that we have that allows staff to give us, you know, thoughts and ideas on how to improve Sparky or ThoughtFarmer. It was very popular. Setting the office alarm, not very popular. Or not very visited, but you better believe it's important if the alarm's screaming in your face and you're trying to figure out how to turn it off. So, you know, you take this with a grain of salt. If I could personalize it, that would be very, 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 three varies, very important, very helpful. Perhaps a more visual display of my bookmarks or activity from top sections. So some of these things was interesting because we learned we could address them through training. Some people just didn't know some of the features that ThoughtFarmer had, right? A bunch of the news are very repetitive, mostly weekly meeting notes from meetings I'm not a part of. It doesn't feel very useful. And so from a training perspective, you can actually unsubscribe from certain feeds. And so that was, you know, something people probably forgot, right? So some more analysis. And then we were able to rank a bunch of themes for improvement, which brings us back to principles, right? How do you get people to come into agreement on how we're going to address these themes for improvement? Agreement here is critical, right? And again, we've all been there, whether it's a public website or an intranet, people in the organization who demand that their information needs to be on the homepage, right? And often we give in for political reasons. And we might feel it's the wrong decision, but without data, our opinion is just as subjective as the request is in the first place. So principles are very important to get around that. We agreed upon some principles to help stakeholders understand why some of their demands weren't being included. I'm not going to get too deep into this because this is going to be different, but we agreed that when we add a new section or a piece of content, we're always going to ask, is it relevant to the majority of staff at both companies? Does it help the majority of staff get their tasks done more efficiently? Does it show the fun and friendly experience of working at the two companies? And can it be displayed with the minimum amount of detail needed to be functional without adding visual or cognitive noise? And really quickly, looking at these one by one, we were able to justify easier some of the more potentially controversial design decisions that we'd be making, right? So we ended up removing the Twitter feed, the ThoughtFarmer Twitter feed. We moved that to a ThoughtFarmer landing page, which had made more sense there. But to OXD people, you know, the Twitter feed and the customer screenshots just added noise, and we wanted to reduce noise. We built a launchpad for global business processes, right, with direct links to our corporate Slack, or Zoom account, or Xero accounts, Join Me. And because we were using an off-the-shelf intranet product like ThoughtFarmer, there were some constraints, right? You can't always have it all. So, you know, people wanted to be able to customize their quick links, but we used bookmarks as a way to do that. And so that came out really well. That worked out really well. We reorganized the layout to better reflect the most used and useful content. Team spotlight card, increase the visibility of fun quotes, maintain polling. I'll show you examples of this in a second. And we even looked at the amount of information that shows up in activity and quieted that down. We went into the admin panel on ThoughtFarmer, which gives you lots of fine-grained control, and reduced the number of updates that people were getting. And so we shared this with staff, right? This is the proposed reorder. Each column had a very specific function, right? Social engagement, company communications and activity, tools and resources. Here's the body layout. I'll get through some of this here. This is the top. So we showed them only a mock-up without the header and without a lot of brand elements because we wanted them to focus on what was important for that particular moment. So staff engagement up front, get that poll up there, get people responding to the poll. High use features, which was the out of office calendar, make sure there's not a lot of friction to find that. We split the company and personal updates because we found that was confusing for people, blending, like, who's speaking to me? Is this my project team or is it the company? So this is actually useful, and it also gave us some options for some more interesting layout choices. Quick links, we revisited those. So this is where staff were now able to customize some of their experience with bookmarks to important areas. We designed some pre-designed headers and graphics that people could use so that we could mix up what was showing up in the thumbnails. Scrolling down real quick, more staff faces, people love faces. Surface personality near those work areas, so quotes kind of balanced along with activity. A quieter activity feed with less items, the frequently used external tools and third-party links, navigation to specific to staff work. So groups that you're part of only show up here, and this helps you navigate faster to specific areas. And then down finally at the bottom, popular, like it's popular, but less essential, feature near the bottom to draw staff lower. But it's not going to get in the way of you doing your work if you can't get to that right away. And then anchoring with fun imagery, ideally a gallery that's updated regularly and not event-based, right? Because those kind of Halloween galleries from 2015 get old after a few years. And then this is a fantastic paella my wife made for me last Father's Day featuring spot prawns. So I'm just going to throw that in there. And then let's end with some tips on a successful rollout. So you can put all the ingredients together, but if the presentation isn't there, it's just not going to be palatable, right? So first of all, over communicate with staff, right? Explain what, when, how. This is an excerpt from an email I sent out before we were about to launch, right? Go into detail for each step. Be very, very specific what you want them to do, but also connect what you're asking them to do to goals and requirements, right? We want to be more relevant, more efficient, more fun. If we want to do that, here are the things that will help you if you do these. Blast all your channels, right? Email, Slack, intranet. We don't want to miss people. Faces are fun. Ask everyone to upload their profile photo. That's a design hack, right? Friendly faces instantly make any design feel more human and approachable. So ask everyone to upload or update their profile photo so that you can maximize the impact of your relaunch. And threaten those who don't update their photo by the deadline. So in this case, I threatened to upload miscellaneous fun animals of my choosing to anyone without a profile photo, which actually was kind of fun. So, and then finally, keep asking questions and keep measuring. Keep your design principles, those principles you started with, keep them close so that you can refer back to them as your intranet evolves and changes. So for example, here's some metrics of our intranet activity comparing 6 months before with 6 months after. Comments, almost 50% more. News items created almost 40% more. With more attractive news display, people were more motivated to create new news articles. Likes, which seems contradictory, less news, less updates, less feed items, but more likes. But by quieting the interface, people were able to focus on things that excited them and engage more. So in this case, no change is good, right? With the bookmarks, people were being more strategic with their bookmarks and only bookmarking those pages that were actually of use to them. And then with less noise and a more focused interface and some training around how following content works, people were following more content because they could find it easier and track it better. From a visual design perspective, we created a hybrid brand that took elements from each brand. Here's some headers developed for different sections that people could use. Here's some photos. We created a gallery that people could access for page thumbnails and headers. We chose a hybrid color palette. Since both palettes were designed with accessibility in mind, we knew contrast wouldn't be an issue. We chose a web font that complemented both brands, ensured that type sizes were legible, and any illustrations or icons were just more decorative. And so the user didn't have to rely on color to be able to use the site. Made a lovely hybrid logo and header animation that could be swapped out seasonally. That was fun. And by now, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, what does the final result look like? So without further ado, here is the shot of the final homepage design for Sparky. Oh wait, no, how did that get in there? That's just the light salad my wife and I made a few years back, featuring, of course, spot prawns. 1 second, there we go. Say hello to our new OXDTF intranet. You've seen enough of the homepage. I want to show some of the inside screens here. And for us, it's not just an intranet, it's a home. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's get to some Q&A.
Thanks, Will. That was incredible. I'd never actually seen the image of the bear with the guitar, so that was really adorable. Yeah, we've got lots of Q&A. I know that was like a lot to get into, and for anyone who's on the recording right now, we will be sending out a link. So if you need to rewatch it again, we will try to get to as many questions as possible. Some of them look very in-depth, so I don't know, some of these may be better to follow up in an email, but Will, I don't know if you're able to see the questions, or do you want me to pull some of these out, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of go through them in order here. So here's one where someone's asking, do you consider any amount of UI customization, e.g. each user can choose layout A, layout B, or maybe just reposition buttons and links, etc. So I'm guessing this is speaking more towards the ability for the user to kind of create their own homepage and design that. That's my guess. In that particular case, we don't really do that. Like I said, we try to design the page in a way that works for the broad majority of people. I think, they're balancing that with customization, right? So the bookmarks tool, being able to follow certain pages, being able to keep your eye on content, that's where the customization comes in, and that's where it becomes more personalized to you on an information level. We don't really want people to have to think too hard about how to create their perfect homepage. And quite frankly, sometimes they'll shoot themselves in the foot, right? Because they do things that they think are neat or cool, but they don't work because they haven't put kind of the rigor into making that layout work for them. Yeah, I've seen a lot of sort of dashboard type scenarios where end users will be able to super customize layout, and it gets pretty messy pretty quickly, and that kind of reflects badly on your software too, right? So it's something to be careful of. A couple other questions here. So one question: show a glimpse of the out of office calendar. I think we can get back to you on that with more detail. It's basically just the calendar feature on ThoughtFarmer. So the out of office calendar shows up as a card on the homepage, and then you can click through to the full calendar. But also on the homepage, it just shows you who's out of office for that day, right? So you don't have to go to the calendar if you don't want to. Another question here: how does the team discern what methodologies to use for conducting research at the start of the project? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And specifically, like on the ThoughtFarmer side, we have a pretty a set professional services approach for clients that has worked super well. And we tend to we're able to repeat that over and over and for great results. On the OXD side, we have different types of clients that change a lot. We have a kind of preferred methods that we use, but we just have to adapt it to the realities of the project. And those realities could be budget, they could be distance, they could be the time you have. And you have to sort of look at those business factors in determining what's the best way to get the results you want. And you also have to look at what actually are you asking, right? And certain methodologies are better suited for certain types of responses. So we're at time now, unfortunately. How do you want to do this, Kelly? Should we answer a couple more?
You know, Zoom hasn't blown up on us. So as long as there's a few people on there, I think if you want to answer a few more questions, that'd be great. I just quickly wanted to add a comment earlier. There was a question about survey fatigue. I just want to say, as someone who is on the other side of the surveys, I love surveys. It makes me feel like the company values my input. So maybe it's also about positioning and, you know, just letting employees know that this is, you know, getting their buy-in to a redesign. I love it. So for me, it's great.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, actually. I think it's all about the tone of the survey and how it's positioned and how it really is for your benefit, that we want to hear from you. And also mix it up, right? Like different types of questions are fun, and try to keep it concise. Like long 30-question surveys that take someone like 45 minutes, you know, you're gonna find your drop off is gonna be pretty steep, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, another question. What was your process for establishing your guiding principles for both the IA performance principles and the homepage principles, i.e. how did you reach agreement? Yeah, well, I mean, again, it comes back to intention. I think there's a lot of different methods that you can use. In our case, for this particular project, I listened to everyone. I heard what everyone said. I drafted the first set of principles based on that, right? And then I shared that and then asked for comments, right? And there was a bit of back and forth, but in general, the principles, if they're abstract enough and they don't get into the details of how we're going to do it, you're going to get agreement generally, right? Your principles aren't going to be like everything has to be blue, because then you're forget it. Like people are just going to flip out because half of us don't like blue and half of us love yellow, and right. But if they're very abstract and kind of business focused and outcome focused, right? Generally, people can't argue with that, right? Like, yeah, we want that. That makes a lot of sense. So in this particular case, there was some back and forth. There's other methods. You know, we've done like whiteboarding sessions and where, you know, people are able to share, you know, Post-its, and then we group those and then vote. And there's different types of methods that you can use for that. What would you suggest as best practice for how often you redesign your intranet? Yeah, that's actually a really great question. First of all, it does depend on the corporate appetite for doing that sort of thing, right? It does require a lot of resources. And if you're not going to get the support, the resources, the time that you need to do it, it's going to be very, very difficult, right? So keeping that in mind, you know, not every organization can do it that often. And I would say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like if it's working for you, it's on brand, and people are able to do what their job is, and no one's complaining about it too much, that's great, right? So I don't think there's like a specific timetable. I think it's more when you start feeling the creakiness of it, right? Or if people are starting to say, hey man, this thing's looking dated, like hello 1995 call, they want their internet back. Like then, you know, maybe start to listen, because even though that might be, you know, surface and visual and doesn't necessarily get in the way of doing stuff, it affects the way people feel about their company, right? They want to work for a company that's modern, that's digital, that's transformed. And so, yeah, definitely keep an ear to the ground for what people are saying, but also keep an eye on metrics and see if like you're starting to see usage change in any way drastically or consistently over time. It might be a good time to start looking at why, right? Maybe the first step isn't, hey, let's redesign the intranet. The first step is, hey, what's happening on the intranet? Let's find that out. And the answer, the solution might be a redesign or it might not be. Another question here. How did you manage developing your new site while maintaining your current site? Did you develop in parallel and then switch over? Yeah. So there was a couple factors here. So on the visual design side, we spun up a clone of a snapshot in time of Sparky. And then that allowed our designers to go in and mess with the colors and you know, create the theme for the new Sparky without impacting anyone else. And then once that was ready, we exported the theme and then just basically plopped it onto the new site, and visually that was ready to go. From a content perspective, that had to be done with the live site. And so there had to be a lot of communication happening there too, right? So, you know, you saw that email, you know, the launch email that I'd sent, which helped people work out like, you know, things to do to make their internet experience more, you know, enjoyable at that aha moment. But also we sent lots of emails before saying, hey, you know what, you're going to notice contents might be moving. People that were affected, we reached out to them specifically in their department saying, hey, you know what, your section's going to move here. Here's the rationale. Everybody saw the IA. Everyone had an opportunity to comment on it. So this wasn't a surprise, but we over communicated to make sure people wouldn't be surprised that we were doing it now, right? So we let people know what we were doing, when to expect it. And so the content reorganization sort of happened, you know, over a period of a few days there. Another 2 questions here. How long does the research phase take, and how long does the designing phase take? Yeah, again, I mean, for this one, you know, like I said, we did it over several months. That wasn't continual work. We were doing other things, obviously. So that was just more, you know, when we were able to do it. Research phase, it really comes down to what you're trying to find out. And also, again, corporate appetite. How much time can your organization allocate to you to do that, right? Because if you don't have the time, it doesn't matter how much it should take. That's what you have, right? So you know, it's kind of a two-way street, right? You take as much time as you can get, but you also do as much research as you have time for, right? And you need to focus on the areas that really are critical and important. So yeah, sorry, that's a really lame answer because I'm not giving you an answer, but I think it really depends on the situation. And the same with the designing phase. Again, that can take, you know, you could conceivably get it done in a week in terms of like getting a design that people are happy with and ready to move ahead with, or it could take a few weeks. So it just really depends on what you have available. Another question. Yeah, so another, this is interesting. Do you find there is gender split regarding survey response rates? Where I sit, responses by males have been generally much lower. Wondering about other methods to get their feedback. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. For one of our surveys, well, first of all, I'm going to preface this by saying we had, with the exception of people that were on vacation, we had 100% response rates, which was awesome. That was fantastic. So I can't really speak to that specifically. And I also, for this project, and I also can't speak to it specifically because for one survey, we anonymized results so that people felt more free to say what they wanted to say. And so we couldn't tell who was who, or you know, things weren't tied to emails or that sort of thing. So that was, that's not something that we saw. But just based on like anecdotal evidence, yeah, we didn't have much of a problem you know, across gender lines in terms of getting people to respond.
And I just showed my enthusiasm for surveys, so that just sort of reinforces that maybe women do like surveys more than men.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe, and maybe it's the content of the surveys that helps too, right? Another question here. Let me see here.
Yeah, maybe just one more. I just want to be respectful of both your time and our attendees' time.
Yeah, there's so many great questions here. I don't know which one. I'll just get the. Let me see here. Okay, so we use SharePoint at work. I find that it's such a complex platform to use, hard to create a layout that works for everyone. So what kind of software would you recommend for creating intranet sites that are much more friendly than SharePoint? Well, I think the thing to keep in mind with SharePoint and products like ThoughtFarmer, which are off-the-shelf intranets, is SharePoint, you know, we like to say SharePoint is like a box of Legos, right? You get this box of predefined components that you can do anything with, right? but to do it, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes some skill, and it takes, you know, some creativity to be able to put something together that's going to work. And it also takes a lot of effort to maintain, and it can be, you know, it can be hard to maintain across large organizations. So yeah, I would say, you know, if you're looking for an intranet site that's kind of just off the shelf, you can plug it in and just start rolling. You know, software like ThoughtFarmer is pretty good at that. I think we are able to, you know, with professional services or without, get you set up, and you're able to do a lot of the things that SharePoint can't do out of the box. But that said, you know, different organizations have different needs, and they have different requirements. And so that's kind of a hard question to just answer on a blanket level. And so I'd have to know more about your situation there. But yeah, so I guess that's about it now, Kelly.
Okay, thank you so much. I know we went over time, but there's just so much to get into. But we will be sending out a copy of the recording to everyone as soon as we can, and hopefully we can answer any questions that we did not answer today. We will do our best to respond to you, either in the email follow-up, or we will reach out individually. So thank you so much for everyone who attended, and thank you so much, Will, for redesigning our intranet and for taking the time to speak with us about the entire process.
Awesome. It was my absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks everybody for showing up. I am honored and humbled. So have a great rest of the week, everybody, and yay, spot prawns.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.